Welcome back, fellow armchair generals. This is Gamer 1745 here with my continuing playthrough of Hearts of Iron 3 with Black Ice 8.52. Okay, we're not doing too well down in New Guinea. We're starting this nice little naval invasion of Crete. Now, around this time, maybe a little earlier, part of Churchill's plan. He invaded, I think it was this island. Well, that's Turkey, so it wouldn't have been that island. Marlini, maybe. It was one of these Aegean islands in here that they basically dashed in and invaded it. And part of, Churchill's plan has for a long time been a Mediterranean control. He always saw it as the soft underbelly of Europe, and as we're sort of seeing here, it ain't really that much of a soft underbelly of Europe, because there's lots of mountains. He, of course, got stuck in the Gallipoli campaign here. There was also, I think, over another sort of big multi-province sort of pocket bubble that, I don't know, like 1 million troops sort of got into and just sort of hung out there and died off, kind of thing. Not 1 million died necessarily, but they were just sort of in a pocket, not doing too much good. Disease and combat stuff. Combat stuff, that doesn't sound too good. Just bad sanitation and all of that type of stuff that really took the toll on the stuff. I'm not that good with World War I history, but something like that. That these, because of the mountains, because of the terrain, and particularly in World War I, because of the lack of logistics, the whole Schlieffen plan was based on railroads. It, of course, was the German right wing always keep that strong to plow along the coast was sort of the main maxim for that. Don't weaken the right was Schlieffen's admonition sort of to whoever after he died. But he later used his plan. In that's where the sort of the hammer blow was to the right, and not don't weaken the right to either exploit a weak spot here, or to make sure you're if there's a like Sedan or some other sort of fortress town that was holding out, don't weaken it to make sure you take it, because he was sure sort of a swinging door around here. But if it didn't quite do that, he still wanted to have the hammer blow come around, and I don't know exactly where, land on Paris or whatever, but have that sort of sweeping outer hammer blow. And these were mostly forces in here to keep gaps from opening in the line, to keep sort of sweeping up the other enemies and keeping pressure so that their forces are fixed here and can't rush off to stop the right flank coming around. Well, what they saw was what happened was, now of course they weren't coming through the Netherlands, they're just coming through Belgium. Where it broke down is where they didn't have railways effectively operating, and you can move troops, I don't know, it varies, but maximum is like 30 miles in a day or something like that they can do, and after a day or two of that, they are done for the most part. They just can't go any further. Yeah, I'm talking walking, marching fast, that kind of thing. Cavalry strategically is not any faster, unlike what this game shows and other things. Is not really any faster than foot units. It just, you can maybe do it for a few days, move them faster than foot units, but not, but then they're just done in, and they take much longer to get back. It's not like, oh, rest for a day and then they can do it. No. So you got your horse, your cavalry, it moves as fast as foot, and the reason it doesn't move any faster is grazing time to a point. It takes the horses a certain amount of time to eat their food. Now the reason I can sort of say it is, one, of course, you can abuse the horse and just push and push and push, and they'll eventually die. But you can do it sort of with like horse superfood, things like oats, for a while, that they can consume enough of them in a short period of time that'll give them enough energy to do it. But really, often, whether you're grazing them or you're having the horse soldiers out there cutting grass and bringing grass to the horses for over an extended period of time, I'm talking weeks here, in practical sense, even with feeding them a fair amount of oats, they're just going to take a certain amount of time to eat, a certain amount of time to rest, that you just can't move them faster than humans. In some ways, they are definitely more delicate than humans. Horses are. Obviously, a good one is, or shows up as, their legs can break a lot easier than humans can, or that kind of thing. Not because you were sort of pushing them in bad terrain, and the horse is just basically done. I mean, in a true modern sense, you can sort of get casts and all that stuff for horses. You don't have to shoot them anymore if they break their leg. Well, it depends on how and where they break their leg and whatever, and how much you're willing to spend on it. But so horse units really aren't any faster than infantry units in a strategical sense. And I know a lot of this from my readings on the American Civil War. And you can look at the Crimea. You can look at, now what was that, the 1850s. You can look at the sort of Franco-Prussian War. But really, the last sort of high-tech horse war was the American Civil War, where there was, obviously you had the mechanizations of railroads and steamships, but outside of that, zero mechanization, literally zero. So, and this is part of the reason why I know some of this stuff is you can move all the supplies you want, and if you organize yourself up, even on the limited Confederate railroads, if you can do it, you can get a lot of supplies, keep units supplied that way via railroads. Once you leave that railroad system, or have that railroad system disrupted, you're back to horse. But it's also the most advanced horse. I know the American horses, not saying this is as an absolute thing over Europe, but generally American horses were generally doing better blood stock. I think, in that case, somebody who may knows a bit more than I do about horses may be able to disprove that. But generally speaking, because you have, of course, sort of I don't know, the Arab bloodlines and whatever else in Europe, you definitely have the aristocratic horse, often owned by aristocratic peoples, that were really good, and then you have the big, huge draft horses that were a lot slower on their movement rates. But I'm not talking running for a brief period. I'm talking moving for a day. They're a lot slower, and they had those definitely. But there was also a lot of poor quality horses that sort of your farm horses and whatnot. A lot of European farmers didn't even have horses, of course. They were much cheaper and at least more commonly available in the Americas than they were in Europe. And so the quality so your cavalry regiments in Europe were probably, for the smaller professional elite armies, were probably much better in Europe than the average American horse. But those aren't the average horses in the army. Most of the average horses are guys pulling, horses pulling wagons that carry the chow for the military units. And so, at least this is my understanding of the various elements on the horse. And so this was sort of, the peak techno horse war was the American Civil War, especially on a big grand scale for multiple years, that had, everything from stalemate fronts, siege of Vicksburg and other places that went on for a long time, or rapid moving maneuver campaigns and everything in between. And they had it all in the American Civil War. So this is some of the areas where I know some horse warfare, and this is looking at that is that really you couldn't move strategically horse units. Again, I can say for a day or 3 you can really push a horse unit, but then they're all done, and it takes literally weeks for horses to get back up on their feet. Is a bit they don't lay down, but get them back to where they're effective again. Where humans, you can rest them for 24 or 48 hours, feed them up with some good steaks and whatever. That's part of the reason humans are much more resilient is that they're meat eaters, and so if they can consume the meat, they get that protein, get that energy, you can get them, push them again. The horses, because they're vegetarians, and often grass really isn't all that nutritious, you have that sort of problem moving around. So your foot units and your cavalry units for breakouts and maneuvers, First World War, you can't really move them that fast. Now, if you have just a few battalions, one, you can stack a few days worth of food, even for the horses, with a few wagons, and go. And you can also rely upon for your horse, again, grazing, because in Europe there's a particularly lot of amount of grass around. And with generally other foods, there's generally food stocks that humans, whether they're raiding, meaning showing up in a town and scrounging all the food they can get, and who cares what the locals are going to eat the next day, or buying food from the locals, or other sorts of things like that. You have that, but once you're starting to move World War I scale armies around, and even if you're showing up in the town, it still takes a few hours to collect all the food and prepare it, so that slows you down. So, but you're moving World War I scale German, Schlieffen Plan invasions. Even if there's enough food, it's going to really slow you down dramatically to not just the town you show up at as you're moving down the road, but you got to go to towns on either sides to collect more food, because there's so many people, so many mouths to feed. And then, of course, you also have to transport all of your ammunition and all of that other kind of things like that. It wasn't the 30 or 60 type rounds that a Napoleonic infantryman would have had in his cartridge box. And that's it. Not that's it for an hour, 30 rounds or 60 rounds. That's it. And battalion may or may not have another supply of cartridges. Warfare was different then. So once you're getting into the mechanized warfare, even early World War I, where you had very few machine guns per battalion, and of course machine guns just eat ammo. Soon as you get off of on the road system, of course, and I don't think European roads were generally that good, but even if they were paved and rather smooth and straight and can take marching of 10,000 soldiers on it and not turn it into either a mud pit or just a dust bowl or something like that, if they were prepared to deal with that kind of movement on them, they were few and far between in trying to move the troops around. So the fast, rapid Schlieffen Plan type movement just really broke down once the rail systems, and part of that was just the lack of good integration and management for the Belgian, moving from trains from Germany to Belgium to France. But also part of that was Belgium's deciding to fight the German invasion, and I do believe there was, and again, I say believe because I don't know, but I do believe there was some level of, as the Belgians were losing, retreating, I don't know whether you want to call it sabotage or just blowing up, not necessarily destroying the rail system, but just blowing up key, track switching points and maybe a few bridges and a few things like that to just put it down. And that's what sort of killed the Schlieffen Plan as moving so fast that the French couldn't react to it. Now, it almost sort of worked until the sort of, the sort of famous French taxis leaving out of Paris, rushing up to the, the Marne? Yeah, rushing up to the Marne here, I guess. And they were shuttling. And it was the first significant scale automobile maneuver, to get troops to the line, in which they were taking basically taxi cabs and other civilian, motor car types and, sort of civilian light early, 1914 and before truck type things, and getting a mechanized war. So without the rails, you can't do that. Well, if you look at a railway map in here, and I've got a few of them, there's very, very little railroads. There's lots and lots of mountains. They're not necessarily alpine mountains, like, where, like this actually sort of kind of stuff, but they're steep enough, a little steeper than these nice rolling hills. They're steep enough, jagged enough, may not be high enough to, in summer, to have snow on them and things like that, and the passes are narrow enough. It's not really a, particularly like I was saying for World War I, to do the soft underbelly and land and charge in and excuse me, secure the capital of, Bulgaria and Sofia and move on and shift and move. That was sort of the vision, shall we say, of Churchill. Now you jump to World War II, he still had the same vision of it, and obviously we now, and the Americans showed how to do it, is that you can fully mechanize and do it, but still the narrow points, the limited access on the road. And you can look at, I think it was supposed to be in the Sicilian campaign, I'm pretty sure, picture, in the Patton movie that is dramatic, and I'm sure 99% of you have seen, where there's like some evacuee farmer type Italian guy with a cart overloaded with furniture, and there's like some donkey that's strong enough to move it, but it's halfway across this bridge. It isn't that narrow, but, or at least shown in the movie. And I think it's apocryphal, meaning I think it's just a story. I don't know that it's real, but I'm sure it would get the characters that there's this long American convoy of troops, tanks, whatever, I forget, but wanting to move, and the farmer's out there trying to pull his donkey out of the way, and there's some, with his cart on it, there's maybe a few Americans trying to pull on it, and it's just not moving, and Patton goes up and, you don't actually see it on camera, but goes up and shoots, theoretically, it's, it shoots the donkey in the head. He says, push that stuff over the side, get moving. And he's absolutely right. You can't allow one farmer and then the farmer's, oh, I lost my donkey. I don't know that an Italian or Sicilian farmer is that emotionally attached to a particular donkey, but it's his only transport. And it's all of his stuff that's now getting dumped over the side or pushed, even if it's wheeled off to the road, not over the side of the bridge, taken off there. He's losing his ability to move. So I understand the Sicilian farmer's despair over it, but you can't allow a mechanized convoy to be stopped because of a single donkey. Okay. But forget that donkey part, but look at just the bridge. If you're down to that one narrow bridge that you've got to move everything across, even good Roman bridges, as one or more commented about the Peninsular War with the British. Has there been anybody build a bridge in Spain since the Romans left? Because there was this Roman bridge, that Roman bridge. So the Spanish weren't building; they were using old Roman stuff then. But even if you're talking about a good old Roman bridge versus a more modern medieval or Renaissance bridge, which probably is not as good, they're not made to either take the weight or simply the amount of vibrations of even if it is to take the weight, but vibrations of heavy traffic loads of tanks and trucks towing heavy artillery, that they're going to collapse, or the enemy can collapse them, or a limited amount that you can move through. So across the river, across the thing. So it really turns the Mediterranean, especially the eastern half, changes a bit once you're over in here, but not a whole lot, into not your soft underbelly of Europe. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't, see, I may be just a contrarian, but some of the, the maxims, you shouldn't build forts because they just get, often talked about how terrible the Maginot Line was. That was, what a waste. They just went around it. I sort of kind of think the Maginot Line worked, and what is it, Von Mellen? I think one of his books, he talks about sort of the second half of the French campaign. He was, adjutant to, the number 2 guy or whatever for a German division. I believe that's, or maybe a bit lower, but that was facing the Maginot Line, and they did break through. And this was sort of after, after the, end of the Dunkirk campaign, but I believe before the fall of France, that they did punch through the Maginot Line in part and get a little bit further into it. So he was saying, well, it wasn't such a great vaunted task. Well, that's one, I don't know how vigorously the defenders in the bunkers that he faces at that point, French, fought, one, and two, part of an idea of any sort of fortification, it's the strong delaying element that you're then supposed to realize, they're attacking here and not over here, but they're attacking here effectively, so you move regular infantry divisions up to supplement the forts. But even if you take that, whether that's true or not, or however good it was, I believe the Maginot Line was extremely effective, and I mean extremely effective in the defense of France, because what it did do was made them go around it. Okay? It influenced the shape of the battle. Fortifications, and I'm talking fortifications, to this day, you can look at particularly the liberation of Kuwait, the first Gulf War, first Gulf War was really Iran-Iraq, but what we call the first Gulf War here for the Americans the Saddam came in, and I don't know what, maybe even called it Saddam Line or something, but came and built all those defenses here, and then the Americans started their air campaign that was hitting every transport that was moving around here, and hitting identified tanks and other sorts of things, so that by the time the Americans did attack, they were like, well, there's a helicopter flying, let's run out and raise our hands to surrender, got anything white to wave, we don't want to be killed, and they were starving by that point because we were destroying their ability to supply. And so we could have just simply rolled through them. But they were sort of worried about some of that. So what it did do was those fortifications, and they also saw, they were very real, that they built mock versions of them somewhere, over here in Saudi held territory, and the units that were preparing to go were doing drills and maneuvers on how to clear the bunker line, which ended up being totally useless because you showed up with 100 Americans, the 10,000 Iraqis or whatever, literally almost, a few thousand for sure, were surrendering. A friend of mine landed on like one of these islands here. He was in the Marine Corps with a few other guys, like about a sort of a platoon or company, and they just surrendered. It was, it was almost like him alone, and it wasn't. Now he wasn't really that, but it was like a platoon or a company, part of one of the diversion landings, in this, in this part, for that war, and they didn't fire a shot. They just were all, oh, thank God you're here, basically, and that's how the Iraqis for that war were giving up to them. And he came ashore in his Marine Corps sort of way, expecting to have a fight, and a good hard fight, and the Iraqis just like, oh, thank God you're here today, you got any water we can have? And that's sort of how it was. But with all of that stuff going on, and the reason that we had the extended air campaign to starve it out because we didn't want to go in and fight it, and had we attacked day one vigorously before that long air campaign, these sort of veteran troops of a similar trench warfare that had fought between Iran and Iraq, they might have given up a good fight and would have been more casualties. I'm not suggesting that they were of the quality or had the equipment levels to win, but it would have been higher casualties for the Americans. Remember, some of the heaviest losses in some of those were some various friendly fire incidents and other things that happened during that war. But the sort of the point is that they shifted their big forces out to the desert, and their main maneuver attack was to avoid the trench line that they had built here and attack in here. That was it. It was whether this was going to be a bloody fight or not, or whether they were just going to come up and sort of engage it. They were planning on swinging around this way and cutting it off from the rear. So these trenches shaped the battle. Not shaped the field, but shaped the way the battle happened. So fortifications to this day, if done well, they will shape how the battle is fought. But they on their own, again, the Maginot Line, you can go around it. Now, if you're prepared for that, meaning you put all the French and British motorized forces, armored and otherwise, and not necessarily race them up into the Netherlands to get cut off, but you keep them here so that they fight the war of maneuver here while the static war sits over here. Again, if you prepare it right, you shape the battle. And now with that, here you got this, and okay, it's more natural defensive positions that will shape the battle, but it will, one, require spreading out of German forces to defend, greater and greater coastlines. When Italy's still in the war and you haven't lost Sicily yet, you sort of kind of know the Americans aren't going to be landing in Yugoslavia, just because air attacks, submarine attacks, the E-boats, I think what the Germans called them, or other sort of, fast attack, PT type boat attacks, all those kind of things, even from, an asymmetrical warfare sense, compared to fleets with carriers and battleships. But we're talking smaller forces attacking some of those things. You're just a little too vulnerable to sail all the way up in here and do your main invasion. So you sort of kind of know that's not going to happen, so you just put your minimum sort of defenses there. But once you've got the southern half of Italy, whether Italy's still in the war or not, it's no big deal to do an invasion up here, because you control at least half of the coastline, or do an invasion out here. It makes them have to spread their forces out. And if, because of, again, the limited terrain options, and particularly we remember railroads, and now of course you have motorization, which can make up for the railroads, but again, limited bridges, tunnels, narrow roads that if you blasted good enough, they aren't going to take a truck on them until you repair them. Now, it can be repaired if you have equipment and some minimal building facilities within 8 hours, but that's still an 8-hour delay, and then that 8-hour delay somewhere else along the line can be struck with either another partisan sabotage attack kind of thing, or another air attack, and you constantly do that. And railways, of course, are very vulnerable as well, so that you can get ashore and in a very limited area overwhelm the local defenses and prepare, counter other landings and maneuvering around that way to tie up a lot of troops, cut them off, and if done right, it can be very successful. Now get back to the reason I'm talking about this is because we're preparing our invasion of Crete here. When the British came in here to their, again, I forget exactly what island it was, but it was one of these. The British did not have air control of the air. It was they might have been already doing some of the plausible raids, but those were brief, big affairs coming in to raid plausible up here. But they were far enough up here that there was, maybe the ability to, come in with air power, but there wasn't, and they didn't. The island that they took did not have any significant airfields on them, I believe. and definitely not any. It's one thing to have a piece of dirt. I remember a long time they were debating, and one of the guys had U.S. military experience talking about air supply. You try dropping fuel for tanks into whatever, and they're giving all the reasons why even in a modern day you can't easily air supply large forces. The air, well, sort of kind of if you have any level, even level 1 infrastructure in any province here, there is a place that's flat enough that they can clear enough trees to land aircraft on. That I sort of presume is on every province that you can go there, including a mountain or a jungle or whatever else, that given a division of troops with some basic hand axes and saws, they can clear an airfield. That does not equate to we can land aircraft here, repair the aircraft there, rearm and refuel the aircraft there. So you can land, offload fuel for the units or whatever it is, equipment, men, and turn that airplane around without refueling the airplane. Just fly it there, land, and turn it around and fly it home. No maintenance, ground crews, none of that kind of stuff. On the scale that we're talking about in just about any province. I'm sure you can find me some island province that it couldn't happen in, but for the most part, most all these places have some place that is either already or can readily be made level and flat enough to operate. But on one of these islands, it wasn't one of the tiny, super tiny ones. It was a modest size one. That they didn't secure any good airbase situation to be able to fly in enough fighters to hold 24 hours a day to hold the air zone, and so it allowed even limited Italian and German air attacks on the resupply convoys coming in, anytime day or night, bombing missions against the British, and they didn't have enough anti-aircraft guns to effectively, again, I don't know if they had any or not, but I read an article about this probably about 15 years ago or more, but they couldn't effectively defend the airspace from attack. So not that they couldn't shoot down an aircraft or two, but it wasn't effective. So looking at all that, it basically ended up being a disaster that the British were able to withdraw the I think it was a little less than a division. It was several battalions, but I don't think it was a full division, that they came in and kicked the Germans or the Italians or whoever the garrison force was out. Well, and they did it quite spectacularly, taking the island, and did that very well, but they just couldn't hold it. So we're not making that mistake. At least I hope we're also not making a mistake of sending out this force. Does have some carrier air protection that here, because we're hitting something that's far enough out that yes, they have. I see some of these air units here. I'm hoping my air here will deal well enough with that. Okay, we lost that. Lost that. These guys here. Okay, let's see here. Comet sighted. Yes, of course, this is sort of a play off of the various other Paradox games where, the mysterious comet sighted in Chaos in the Land or something. But okay, reports coming in that the ME-163 comet has been spotted flying over our country. What's it up to? Where did it come from? No one knows. Possibly some kind of test flight. Well, cute and all. Okay, now we're counterattacking us. Let's see how well this works. but this aircraft could not have done that, what was just described. Germany, we've talked about this, the German series and this series, was definitely looking for wonder weapons. This jet, this rocket, because it was truly a rocket, not a jet, it did not intake any substantial amount of air that heated up and sent out through a turbine engine. It was purely a rocket thrust. Sure, it had, I don't know whether it was contained in it or I don't think so. It needed oxygen for its reaction, I presume. Z-Stoff and T-Stoff. Maybe it doesn't. I don't know. A mixture of two chemicals. I think I have that right. Z-Stoff and T-Stoff. That was in two different containers and was mixed, because it's a liquid rocket. It was mixed at the point of ignition or use. And so they were looking at all these little alternatives. What made this craft so useful was, and what was sort of the situation that Germany thought, what it, in the Battle of Britain, what was going on was once the incoming German bomber raids were spotted, then at that point they would take off their aircraft and swarm up to the bombers, or just the patrolling aircraft that were patrolling around Britain would happen to be near enough to catch these invading bombing raids. That's what they thought was sort of happening, and since there were so many of the aircraft attacking them, they presumed that there was that many more, and that's sort of why they switched when they switched, because they almost won that air war. They were within days of really pushing the RAF out of the air. But they really just thought that they were fighting, I don't know, a quarter, I don't know exactly how they would have figured it, a quarter of the air power that just happened to be available at the point of the bombing, raids during the day coming in on the airfield. When in fact, with the radar and picking up the Germans as they were forming up and preparing for their raids, that they concentrated all of their air on the incoming air armada, if you will, and attacked it. And so it was, maximum use of available, and, meaning good maintenance, got pilots for, all that kind of thing, available fighters to intercept them. And so they were also up there at altitude, ready to attack. Well, Germany, especially if you look at mostly, this was all happening, for the most part in this part of Britain. Yeah, there were raids in other places, but there weren't that many of them. Germany, and looking at that scale, because they were bombing in Paris at times. They bombed arms factories. The Americans did, at least one I know of. Read about an article of one of the arms factories, and it wasn't bombing of all of Paris. It was bombing in the greater Paris area to targeting a particular known armaments factory that was producing components for German use. I'm sure it got civilian buildings around it. It's not that, but they weren't carpet bombing, the Arch de Triomphe and everywhere else, but they were bombing occupied areas as well as heartland German targets. So it's a much bigger air zone that even if you can spot the incoming convoys and air armadas, and German radar was never really as great ranging as the Allied radar, but it got better as time went on. And all of that, you still couldn't get all the aircraft formed up ready to meet the incoming attacks. So one of the main questions was getting to altitude and attack in enough time to be able to strike at the bombers. Climbing takes a lot out of the aircraft, takes a lot of fuel, and while you're climbing up there, the aircraft is, well, maybe if you spotted it, no, it's coming close enough to you, maybe coming towards you, but more than likely it's flying away from you, so you have to catch it up. and solve that problem. This is was sort of the response purely to bombers, in that you needed, a little bit of warning, but that's, a bunch of, system like they had in other places, including in Germany. A bunch of people out there with binoculars looking up in the sky. You hear the bomber coming, you sort of pinpoint them, radios or telephones, letting them know. That's normally, any sort of basic miminal system will be enough to do that. And so that these guys were prepared on the ground, ready to go, and at the right moment they would take off, and they could zip up and get to altitude so fast. But basically they had one shot. You could turn it off, the rocket motor, but I don't know if you could restart it. I think it was started on the ground. But you really, and they've quickly learned, you didn't ever want to turn that rocket motor off. So you turn that rocket motor on, power up into the sky, and probably before your first attack run, you've burnt all your fuel up. And it was that short. And then you would have 2 or 3 attack runs as basically a glider, but not a slow glider. I mean a really fast, and it's going that you could dive down and then pull up and gain altitude. It's moving that kind of speed, and you could do several passes on it. Basically, during those phases, it was an invulnerable aircraft. No fighters were really ever able to get enough in position to hit it, and it's a tiny aircraft, as well as moving so fast, and as well as, if you know anything about it, how difficult it is for anti-aircraft gunners that are on aircraft, the waist gunners, the ball turret gunners, the tail gunners, to actually hit the incoming aircraft, because most of that was just stay away, stay away, stay away. If you get too close, the ball actually hits you. And also you'll see the tracers coming near you, so you're nervous, so you don't shoot at me very well. That's a lot of what that did, and gave confidence to the crews that they're doing something. But they also did hit a lot of aircraft, but a lot of the aircraft they hit didn't either kill the pilot or damage the aircraft enough that it shot it out of the sky. It was just, we got a few holes in here, and they'll get repaired. And you can do that with this thing too. If you hit, it depends on where you hit, of course, but you can damage it and it'll be just fine in landing. What they found is the most dangerous thing for the pilots was its own aircraft. It was designed to have the wheels here that would come off after it took off, because they didn't want the drag, and they didn't want the extra weight of having landing gear that retracted into the aircraft. Now, that worked fine. The aircraft it had, which drops down as sort of a spring cushioned skid down there that would absorb a lot of the landing impact. And they're to coming back down to your actual airbase, or to just generally any field. And it was pretty short, because by that time you're slowing down quite a bit. Now, there were some of those aircraft shot down sort of in that phase. Not too many, but sort of in the later glide mode. Not the early glide mode, but the later glide mode. Some were shot down then. And I'm sure some, didn't land well and ran into a building and the pilot died. But those weren't, or a tree or something else. Those weren't the main causes. The main causes of death was that Z-Stoff and T-Stoff was still, enough of it was in the system. This is why they learned to let that rocket motor burn fully out, that if you had turned it off, or if there was just enough in there, that when you landed, sort of the shock and jarring element of the landing, especially if it had been mixed, the two chemicals had been mixed and it was still in the system, that it could catch it on fire, but basically a virulent fire that was almost an explosion, that wouldn't, generally, because they didn't have ejection seats or anything like that, wouldn't allow you to get out in time. So it wasn't so much a crash impact directly was killing them, it was not having a cleaned out system of the fuel when landing. So if your fuel system was nice and cleaned out and you could land the skids, everything was great, you're doing good. It did pretty well. But If that had too much fuel, not that it's 100% likely, but it's much highly likely, and sort of the main cause of casualties was the fuel system catching on fire on landing. So that's sort of the story of the Comet. So very short, very brief runs. If it wasn't for the loss, because often good pilots, loss of the pilots for that thing, it was probably an effective aircraft. Come on, retreat, retreat. I want you to retreat. You keep getting cut off by Japanese naval operations. Some of Germany's wonder weapons really weren't worth the cost of the investment, shall we say. Some of them were. Like I say, the Comet, I think it may have been. If it wasn't for that loss of life and material as well, of course, on landing. Where like the 262, if it didn't have that engine problem, it very much would have been worth the cost of production. And the engine problem was, as I don't know how many of you know, but it was the situation of the metals used to make the engine weren't able to deal with the high temperatures enough, so the jet engines burned out way fast. I'm not saying like in the middle of a flight, but just the heat would warp them, so they might have like 3 or 4 hours or something like that, and then that engine was just done. You had to rip it out and put in a whole brand new engine. I presume you could recycle the engine components, if you will. But okay, minor breakthrough. That's nice. But it's basically scrapping it and sending it back to the factory for a new production, if you at that point. And so they built a lot more of those 262s than they ever built engines for them because of that. And it wasn't the quality of the production as it was the quality of and they were using the best materials they could get, but it was the quality of the materials that limited there. Okay, they're retreating, these are retreating, this isn't going well. They're retreating, will he be able to retreat in time? This whole campaign, this New Guinea campaign, is not going well. Well, I know I talked a lot, hope it was interesting enough. We'll pick this up next episode with more Hearts of Iron. Again, thanks for watching, I really do appreciate that, and of course liking the videos. And love hearing from you. If you spot things I've gotten wrong, I actually do love the corrections, because I'm just talking off the top of my head. If you've got the right facts, or you can post a link to them, I do appreciate that, and I don't feel bad at all, because I want to give out the best history I can. So see you next time.